Hi, welcome to lesson 1.3. In today's lesson, we are going to learn all about the Micmac of the East Coast. We're going to learn who they were and how they organized their society. So stick around and let's learn something. Today we're going to learn about the Mi'kmaq people and the way in which they organized their societies. This is the first of the three main groups of First Nations, the Mi'kmaq being the one today, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, which we are both going to learn later in this chapter. So where were the Mi'kmaq? Well, they lived in eastern Canada. You can see on the map here where they are. And they were one of the first First Nations here in North America to make contact with the Europeans. If you take a look at the map on the far right-hand side, you can see its actual location in Canada. And it just lends itself towards being nearest to that of Europe, from where the Europeans were exploring from and making their way, trying to find that shortcut to Asia, which we discussed in the past. And when they found land, they found this part of Canada, and then they were making contact with this group of people. So traditionally, they are hunters and gatherers, and they lived in the woodlands and the coastal regions of Prince Edward Island, the Gaspé region in Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. If you've ever been out to that part of Canada, it's a beautiful place. It's very scenic, and this is where they were traditionally found. They hunted, they gathered food, and they also fished. You can see we have an image here, not the best quality, but this is the traditional months of their year and what they would be doing at each month. So some months they would be out hunting. Some months they would be gathering. Some months they would be out there fishing. So they knew nature very well, like many of the First Nations did, all of the First Nations actually, and they used that cycle so that they could help feed their people and survive the conditions that were Eastern Canada. They lived in small villages, so they lived in small groups. These groups were called clans. And these clans were used to help them cooperate with each other. So different clans here and different clans there, and it helped them share cooperation. And it forced them to live in harmony, so they would work together. And these clans were made to help organize the sharing of resources. So you've learned in years past what are some resources. Oil is a resource. Fish is a resource, forestry is a resource, and they use these clans to help them organize the sharing of those resources. And it told different clans where they can hunt, where they can fish, as to not deplete the resources that were there and to help share them with everybody that is around. Because you remember from previous lessons, First Nations are one with nature, and they go hand in hand. So we don't want to waste anything that we find in nature. And as we go through this chapter, you'll see examples of using nature to its fullest. And you learned probably already in grade 4 how First Nations, they used the entirety of animals from hunting expeditions. Nothing went to waste. The Mi'kmaq had a very healthy diet. They gathered berries, they gathered other things that they could eat, and because of their healthy diet, it was common for them to live up to 100 years old, which is a lot different than the Europeans that came over, who during this period of time didn't have those late ages. And the average age of a European was roughly between 30 and 35 years because of disease, because of war, and because of the living conditions in which they were accustomed to. And I say accustomed, but really a lot of them died because of those living conditions. I mentioned earlier the connection to nature. The Mi'kmaq are no exception. They had a very close relationship to nature, to Mother Earth is what they called it. Their creator, we saw this in the last lesson. We read the creation story of the Mi'kmaq. Their creator is Kisulk. And Kisulk, the creator, from that opening creation story, made all humans equal to everyone else. Humans were not separated from nature. They weren't separate from the mountains. They weren't separate from the plants. And they weren't separate from other animals. And they weren't better than any of those other elements in nature. They were on equal playing field, which meant then, in their traditional teachings, if everybody is equal, then everything is treated with respect, be it a living or a non-living thing. So mountains are not living, but they need to be shown that respect. A river, although flowing, is non-living, and you need to show those bodies of water respect. Animals are living, other people are living, trees are living, and everything needs to be treated with that respect because everybody's on that equal playing field. And when a resource did need to be used, the entire resource was used. So nothing went to waste. They found a use for absolutely everything that was taken from Mother Earth. Everything was used, from bones of animals to the fur of animals. Everything was used, including if they needed to cut down any trees. All the parts of that tree that were being cut down, everything was used. Nothing went to waste. They also had a very organized system of government. Government, we've been learning all throughout elementary what government does, and it helps people to become organized, to stay organized. And this was no different for the Mi'kmaq people. They used government to help organize themselves. One major difference between how we see government and how the Mi'kmaq saw government is that the Mi'kmaq believed that land cannot be owned. And this is completely opposite of that from a European perspective, where land is something that can be owned. The Mi'kmaq believed no land is owned, instead land is shared. So different groups of Mi'kmaq, they would use land differently, and although they had their separate territories and the clans lived in separate areas, it wasn't their area, it was their area that they were sharing with other people. And the government of the Mi'kmaq, they created rules. They created rules and protocols so that the land was used for specific reasons. Maybe this area we are going to use it for fishing. This area we will use it for farming. This area we'll use to cut down the trees for our forestry. And everything is used equally so that nothing gets overused, nothing gets wasted, and it's shared amongst everybody, all the Mi'kmaq clans that are in the area. So we mentioned before that they lived in these small clans, and each clan had a local leader called a Sagama. And that Sagama is chosen as the leader because he is a good hunter. He excels at hunting. He has that natural talent to be a good hunter. Because so much of their existence did rely on hunting, even though they were gatherers as well, a good hunter shows leadership and has the qualities of a strong leader. So this is who they looked for. The government of the Mi'kmaq, of these clans, they then further were divided into 7 districts, so 7 of these areas, and each had its own council, each had its own power. They could go to war with other individuals, they could make peace with other individuals. They didn't have to go to their grand council, which we'll talk about in a minute here, but they could choose amongst themselves what they wanted to do. And each individual district determined where and how they were going to hunt and fish. And that is really important because they would know that territory better than other areas or other groups, and then they could determine where the ideal spots were for each of those activities. And all of these 7 districts and all of these little clans that existed, they also shared the Grand Council. And the Grand Council affected all Mi'kmaq. So these are big, pressing issues that would need to be solved, or solutions that needed to be found that affected all the Mi'kmaq people. So, for example, if there was a landslide that affected one of the clans, the Grand Council is not going to get involved with the repair or trying to fix or find a solution to that landslide, as the example that we used. But let's say, for example, we have the arrival of the Europeans. Well, the Grand Council is going to meet and they're going to come up with some solutions or some ideas. How are we going to greet these people? How are we going to interact with these people? Because these people, the Europeans, are going to affect the overall outcome and overall outcome of the Mi'kmaq people. So anything that affects the entire group, the Grand Council will get involved. And they did this by making decisions. And they would listen, the Grand Council would listen to both men and women on an issue, and any agreement that is made by consensus. You are very familiar with consensus. Oftentimes, you have to make consensus to solve problems. It's just a natural way to solve any kind of issues that might arise. And there's some sort of problem that takes place. People have a solution, they discuss it. Somebody comes up with a proposal. They discuss it some more, they see if it works. If it doesn't work, then people discuss why it's not working. Then they change their idea. And then they go back to kind of deciding whether or not this is going to work. If it doesn't work, they keep going back and forth until it does work, or they just scrap the idea together. If it works, that means consensus has been achieved, and we can follow through with whatever actions we decided we are going to do. That being said, it doesn't mean that everybody is happy, because every single group has to compromise to make this work. But it's a natural way, like I mentioned earlier, it's a natural way to solve problems. It might not be the best in some people's opinions, but at the same time, it won't be the worst way to solve problems. And in school, you've seen this. You've come to agree. You've solved agreements or disagreements through consensus before, where everybody at the end is happy with whatever decision is made, and you follow through. Women, as we are going to see not only with the Mi'kmaq, but the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee as well, played a very important role in First Nation culture. From a Mi'kmaq perspective, women were responsible for families to live a good and healthy life. They were busy. They raised children and they took care of the home. They collected and prepared food, because remember, they were gatherers. But they also hunted too. They hunted small game. So small game were your tiny animals. They hunted them for food, and they hunted them for clothing. And from the bigger animals, they also made clothing. And they also had a very important say in government. Although they couldn't be elected to any grand councils, women who were their elders, they definitely had a voice, and people would go to women to get their opinion, to ask for advice. And Mi'kmaq women did have a say in, are we going to go to war? Should we make peace with this group that we are fighting with? So their opinions held great value, and they were very well respected. And you'll see that with the other groups as well as we go through the chapter. All right, what I'd like you to do now is head over to your notebook and complete the questions that are there.